French Connection, The Conversation, Superman. Gene Hackman has died at the age of 95.
He played one of the most iconic villains in movie history. He walked away from Hollywood at the height of his fame and vanished into a quiet life most of his fans never got to see. And when police finally opened the door to his home in Santa Fe, what they found wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a crime. It was something far more human and far more heartbreaking than anyone expected. This is the real story of Gene Hackman's final days, the woman who spent her life quietly protecting him, and the truth that took months of investigation to fully understand. On the afternoon of February 26, 2025, two maintenance workers arrived at a large adobe-style home on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was routine work, the kind of visit that happens a dozen times a week at properties like this one. But something was wrong the moment they reached the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was silent in a way that didn't feel like an empty house. It felt like a house that had been holding its breath for a long time. What the workers found, and what police confirmed shortly after, was that Gene Hackman, the legendary actor, and his wife Betsy Arakoa, a classical pianist, were both dead inside their home. So it was on their three dogs. The other two dogs were found alive. In the hours and days that followed, headlines exploded with speculation. Was it a gas leak? A murder-suicide? Something more sinister? For weeks, nobody had solid answers, and in that vacuum, theories multiplied. But the real story, the one that finally emerged from months of careful investigation, autopsy reports, and forensic work, turned out to be quieter and sadder than any of the wild theories that filled the internet. To understand what really happened in that house, you have to understand who these two people were and how they ended up living such a private, guarded life together. Gene Hackman was born in San Bernardino, California in 1930, and he did not have an easy road into acting. He enrolled at the Pasadena Playhouse, one of the most respected acting schools in the country, and by his own account and the account of classmates, he was not seen as a rising star. In fact, he and his friend Dustin Hoffman, who would go on to become one of the biggest names in American film, were both voted among the least likely to succeed by their fellow students. Hackman didn't let that define him. If anything, it seemed to fuel him. He kept working. He took small theater roles, then small television roles, slowly building a resume while facing rejection after rejection because casting directors didn't think he had the right look or polish for leading roles. His breakthrough came in 1967 with Bonnie and Clyde, where he played Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother. It was a supporting role, but it was unforgettable, earning him his first Academy Award nomination. From there, Hackman's career built momentum until 1971, when he took on the role that would define him for a generation of filmgoers, Popeye Doyle in The French Connection. Doyle was rough, obsessive, morally complicated, a cop willing to bend every rule to catch his target. Audiences and critics had never quite seen a performance like it, and it earned Hackman the Academy Award for Best Actor. He didn't stop there. In 1974, he starred in Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, playing a surveillance expert consumed by paranoia and guilt, widely regarded as one of the finest performances of his career. He worked with Al Pacino in Scarecrow. And then, in 1978, he did something that surprised everyone who thought they had him figured out. He played Lex Luthor in Superman, turning a comic book villain into something sharp, funny, and strangely charming. It proved Hackman wasn't just a dramatic actor. He had range that few of his peers could match. Over the following decades, he built one of the most respected filmographies in Hollywood, appearing in more than 80 films, working across genres from crime dramas to comedies to westerns. In 1992, he won his second Oscar, this time for Best Supporting Actor, for his role as a brutal sheriff in Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. Eastwood, who directed and starred alongside him, would later say that no actor he worked with brought more honesty to a performance, and that Hackman wasn't just a colleague to him, but a real friend. Hackman also earned widespread affection for his role in Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums in 2001, introducing him to a new generation of fans who hadn't grown up with The French Connection or Superman. But behind the accolades, Hackman was dealing with something the public rarely saw: a heart that had been failing him for years. In 1990, at the age of 60, he underwent an angioplasty procedure after suffering chest pain that radiated down his arm while traveling. Doctors caught the blockage in time, but the scare was a warning sign of what was to come. In a 2004 interview, Hackman spoke candidly about it, saying that at the time he almost didn't understand how serious it was that it happened fast, and that he went in and came out the same day. He admitted that as people get older, thinking about mortality becomes unavoidable, but that his biggest concern wasn't fear for himself. It was making sure his family was taken care of. By 2009, in an interview with Empire magazine, Hackman revealed the deeper reason he had walked away from acting altogether. His doctor had told him plainly that his heart could no longer handle the stress that a film set demanded. For a man who had spent decades commanding intense, physically and emotionally demanding roles, that diagnosis meant the end of his on-camera career. He didn't fight it publicly or make a dramatic exit. He simply stopped. His last major public appearance came in 2003 when he received a Lifetime Achievement honor at the Golden Globes. After that, he slipped almost entirely out of the public eye. In retirement, Hackman found a different kind of life in Santa Fe. He painted, he fished, he rode bikes. He co-wrote historical fiction novels with archaeologist Daniel Lenihan and wrote crime and Western novels on his own. He once described writing as something he could control, because unlike acting, it didn't require a crew of people waiting on him to perform. It was solitary, quiet work, which seemed to suit the life he'd chosen. That life wasn't without more hardship. In 2012, at the age of 81, Hackman was riding his bicycle in Islamorada, Florida, when a pickup truck struck the back of his bike. He wasn't wearing a helmet. He was flown to a trauma center in Miami as a precaution because of the island location, though his team later said the impact was relatively minor and he was released after a short stay with only bumps and bruises. It was a reminder that even a man who seemed larger than life on screen was underneath it all, simply a man growing older. Central to all of this was Betsy Arakawa. She and Hackman married in 1991, and by most accounts, she became not just his wife, but his closest companion, and in his later years, his primary caregiver. Hackman's daughter Leslie later described their marriage as a genuinely happy one, and said that Betsy played an enormous role in keeping her father going, watching over his health and well-being with real devotion. Publicly, the couple rarely appeared. Hackman had always guarded his privacy, and after retirement, that only became more true. One of his last known public sightings in 2023 showed him outside a restaurant in Santa Fe looking visibly frail, using a cane, leaning on Betsy for support. That image, in hindsight, tells you a lot about where things stood in his final years. Hackman was 95 years old. He was living with advanced heart disease and, as would later be confirmed, advanced Alzheimer's disease as well. Betsy Arakawa, more than 30 years younger than her husband, had effectively become his full-time caretaker, managing his health, his medications, his daily needs, largely out of the public eye. When investigators began piecing together the timeline of what happened inside that house, the picture that emerged was devastating in its simplicity. Betsy had been searching online in the days before she died for information about flu-like symptoms, dizziness, and breathing difficulties. Records showed she had called a local health clinic on February 12th seeking treatment, but she never received care. Her communications, emails, and texts stopped abruptly on February 11th. Investigators later determined that this was very likely the day she died. What killed her was not violence, and it was not a gas leak. It was hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare but serious illness caused by exposure to the droppings of infected rodents, particularly deer mice, which are common throughout rural New Mexico. It's a disease that begins with symptoms that look almost exactly like the flu, fatigue, fever, muscle aches, before rapidly progressing to severe respiratory distress. Human cases are uncommon, but when they do happen, they carry a high fatality rate. According to New Mexico's state veterinarian, there have been roughly 136 known human cases of hantavirus infection in the state over the past 50 years, and around 42% of those cases proved fatal. Betsy's autopsy showed her lungs were heavy and congested, consistent with the disease, and toxicology results ruled out drugs, alcohol, and carbon monoxide poisoning as factors. Her death, officials concluded, was entirely natural and almost certainly unexpected and fast-moving in its final stage. That leaves the second half of this tragedy, and in many ways the part that's hardest to sit with. Because of his advanced Alzheimer's, officials say it's genuinely difficult to know for certain whether Gene Hackman fully understood that his wife and primary caregiver had died in another part of their home. Investigators said it's quite possible that he did not. His pacemaker data showed his heart rhythm went abnormal on February 17th, which the chief medical examiner believes marks the day he most likely died, about a week after Betsy. His autopsy showed severe, long-standing heart disease, including multiple prior surgeries, evidence of earlier heart attacks, and kidney changes related to high blood pressure. Toxicology also revealed a low level of acetone in his system, a marker that shows up during prolonged fasting, indicating he likely hadn't eaten in the days leading up to his death, most likely because the person who normally looked after those needs was no longer there to help him. He was found in a small room near the back of the house, not far from the kitchen. He had a cane and a pair of sunglasses nearby, suggesting he may have simply been going about his day when his heart finally gave out. Betsy was found in a bathroom on the opposite side of the home. Early reports noted a space heater nearby and some scattered pill bottles, details that fueled early online speculation about overdose or foul play, but the toxicology results later closed that door completely. She tested negative for alcohol and any intoxicating drugs. There was no trauma. There was no evidence anyone else had been involved. One of the family's 3 dogs, kept in a crate, did not survive the time that passed before anyone realized something was wrong. The other 2 dogs were found alive, which is its own quiet, difficult detail in this story, a reminder of just how long the house sat undisturbed before help arrived. New Mexico's chief medical examiner, Dr. Heather Jarrell, who personally performed Hackman's autopsy, put it simply at a press conference months later. She said he was in a very poor state of health, that he had significant heart disease, and that ultimately, that disease was what led to his death. Both deaths were officially ruled natural. Not homicide, not suicide, not the result of any environmental hazard. Just 2 people deeply connected after more than 3 decades of marriage, whose bodies failed within about a week of each other, in a home where, for reasons tied to Hackman's cognitive decline, no one realized in time that anything was wrong. When the news broke in February, the reaction from Hollywood was immediate and heartfelt. Clint Eastwood released a statement calling Hackman one of the most talented actors he ever worked with, someone whose performances were always genuine and powerful, and someone he considered a close personal friend. Gwyneth Paltrow, who co-starred with Hackman in The Royal Tenenbaums, shared a tribute on social media with a photo of the 2 of them together. Hackman's daughters, Elizabeth and Leslie, along with his granddaughter Annie, released a joint statement describing the loss in deeply personal terms, saying that while the world knew him as one of the greatest actors of his generation, to them he was simply dad and grandpa, and that his passing left an emptiness that words could not fill. They also spoke warmly about Betsy, with Leslie specifically crediting her with keeping her father going in his later years and saying how grateful the family was for the care she gave him. Looking back at the full picture now, what's striking is how far the truth ended up from the early speculation. There was no mystery intruder. There was no hidden scandal behind the walls of that Santa Fe home. There was an aging man, once one of the most celebrated actors in the world, quietly living out his final years with a devastating illness, and a woman who had spent decades by his side, caring for him, managing his life, and shielding him from a world that no longer needed to see him struggling. When her own health failed suddenly and without warning, there was simply no one left to notice in time. It's a sobering reminder of how isolating caregiving can become, especially for couples who value their privacy the way Hackman and Arakawa clearly did. It's also, in its own way, a testament to what their marriage was. Betsy Arakawa didn't have to build her life around caring for a partner more than 30 years her senior. But by every account from the people who knew them, she did it out of genuine devotion, right up until the very end. Gene Hackman leaves behind an extraordinary body of work, From the raw intensity of the French Connection to the wit he brought to Lex Luthor, to the quiet devastation of the conversation, to the offbeat warmth of the Royal Tenenbaums. 2 Academy Awards, more than 80 films, and a career that spanned 5 decades. But for the people who actually knew him, the man behind those performances was, by every account, someone who valued honesty in his craft as much as he valued privacy in his life, and someone who, in his final years, was cared for and loved by a woman who never sought the spotlight for herself. If this story moved you, or if you have memories of a Gene Hackman performance that stuck with you over the years, share in the comments. And if you want more honest, well-researched looks at the lives behind the legends of Hollywood, make sure you're subscribed because there are more of these stories coming.